Hi, everyone. Before we get into today's podcast, I just want to apologize that partway into the podcast, the audio quality drops to a much lower level because despite my audio recording software saying that I was recording, it only recorded the first about 20 minutes or so, and then it didn't keep recording after that point. So technology doesn't always work how you hope it will. So the audio quality goes down a bit partway through the podcast. I apologize, but we still answer everybody's questions, and I hope that it's still valuable despite the slightly less enjoyable audio quality. So I hope you'll forgive us, and as the Chinese would say, 多多包涵, which means please forgive us. So thank you very much, and enjoy the podcast. Welcome back to the Mandarin Blueprint Podcast. Today we have a number of emails to go through, comments on the course, comments in the Mandarin Blueprint community. So we're going to cover all of those today. But as a reminder, if you're new to the Mandarin Blueprint Podcast, the main goal of this podcast is to help people out with their questions relating to Mandarin study. Now, most of the people who will ask us questions are people who are following the Mandarin Blueprint Method course curriculum that you can find at mandarinblueprint.com. And we answer questions via email, via comments in the actual video course platform, because Mandarin Blueprint is a video course. It's a lesson by lesson. You have a video with a description and some downloads or some Google documents that associate with it, some smart flashcards and all that good stuff, where you can linearly follow a step-by-step process to learn Mandarin Chinese as quickly as possible. And in each lesson, people will leave comments. They'll send emails to contact@mandarinblueprint.com, or they'll leave a question in the Mandarin Blueprint community. And so the weekly podcast is designed to answer all those questions, because we are a two-person team essentially here with Luke and I. And we do have some people helping us out, but it's mostly with things like video editing or helping us keep our website technically running well, since we're not developers and things like that. But when it comes to the content of people's questions about Chinese, it's just Luke and I answering. So the best way for us to aggregate all those questions and answer them in one place is to do a podcast. So that's what the Mandarin Blueprint Podcast is all about. This week, we have some great questions that came in via email. And so we're going to jump right into those. And even if you're not a part of the Mandarin Blueprint Method course, I bet you'll find a lot of these quite useful. So the first email today comes from James Lemacher, and he said, "Thanks, Phil. I just signed up for lifetime access to the Mandarin Blueprint Method course." Lifetime access is something that we don't really advertise too much publicly anymore. We just have an annual subscription and a monthly subscription. But if you're up for spending $500, $499, you can get the lifetime access to the course, which essentially just means you'll have access to the course for forever, no matter how many iterations we make of it, whether it's we decide to turn it into an app or turn it into some other form than it is now, you'll still get full access to it. And, considering that we can guarantee fluency and literacy in Mandarin so long as you do it every day, small price to pay. I paid a lot more for that to go to my university course. But anyway, so continuing here, he says, "I have been studying Mandarin on and off, more off than on, for a while now, but found that I was at a point where characters were absolutely going to be essential for me to move forward. So when I started reading about Mandarin Blueprint, I was excited to learn that you developed your methods because you reached the same conclusion. I certainly hope it won't be a quote-unquote lifetime before I reached a useful level, but having an open-ended subscription makes me feel more comfortable, sure. Plus, I am pleased to be able to do all I can to add my support for the work you have done to benefit all learners of Chinese. Best, Jim." So thanks so much, Jim. And I think that everybody who studies Mandarin is going to eventually run into that realization, whether you start not focusing on characters, like, for example, Luke focused a lot on pronunciation at the beginning, which, he still benefits to from this day. That's like actually the right thing to do, is to focus first on pronunciation, but very quickly get into characters. I started characters right away, just by luck. It was just that I had a roommate who was learning Japanese, and he said, if you want to learn any East Asian language, you got to do characters first. So just luckily had a roommate who knew that. But my point just being that everybody's going to run into that realization eventually. They're going to realize, oh, if I learn this language without the characters, I hit a ceiling quite quickly. And it's only natural because, the language only has 420 syllables. So how are you going to learn the language purely by audio if you've got so many homophones? There's so many sounds that sound so similar. And if you know the characters, it's funny how your brain distinguishes them, because you could see two characters or two words that have the exact same tone and have the exact same pronunciation, but when you hear it in the different contexts because you know the characters, it doesn't even occur to you that they're the same. But when you're only counting on audio, you go, well, that's the same exact sound, and how am I supposed to know that? And it can be very frustrating. So everybody eventually comes to that conclusion, and so we were trying to, with Mandarin Blueprint, trying to be like, hey, come to that conclusion right off the bat. And then that way you'll make sure that you don't end up taking too many wrong paths. So that was the question from James. Next, we have a very good email from Abigail, and she's been on the course for a while. She's taking it at a relatively slower pace because she only has a little bit of time per day to spend on Anki and the course itself. And she has some questions that came up regarding Anki and regarding a couple of articles that she read that she found on Reddit. And this is a very interesting set of questions, and this email's kind of long, so I'll go in and out, but it's really fascinating stuff. I bet this stuff will apply to a lot of people. Okay, so Abigail says, "Hi Luke and Phil, you've said before you want feedback on the Mandarin Blueprint Method, and I came across a really interesting article on one guy's frustrations in learning language using Anki this morning. The comments are worth reading too. It collates many people's experience of learning languages, and it made me reflect too. Encouragingly, he seems to have come to many of the same conclusions and methods that you have." Now, she leaves the links to these two articles. The one he called "The Near Impossibility of Learning Languages," and the other he called "How I Use Anki to Learn Korean." So this is a guy named Danny Crichton. So the links to these articles are down below if you're interested. He does go into a lot of interesting stuff in these articles, but I'll leave the focus of this response to what Abigail's saying, and you guys, if you're interested in what he was saying, check out those articles. But one of the main things I will say about these articles is that he didn't have the Mandarin Blueprint Method, so without the Mandarin, and I mean, he was also learning Korean, but he didn't have like the Korean Blueprint Method that was kind of guiding him which way to go. So I guarantee you there are probably a lot of his flashcards that were not the right flashcards to be focusing on, which can be discouraging. If you have too many flashcards in your Anki that are boring or unrelated to what you really need to learn, then it can be a bit frustrating. But Abigail also has some frustrating things that have come up with our flashcards, and that is really well worth addressing. So she says, "Something else I've struggled with in Anki is synonyms. Maybe for some sentence cards, we need more than one gapped sentence to make it clearer which character/word it is. I regularly Google the difference between certain characters and words and make a note of the rules. For example, 可是 and 但是, they both mean but, 在 and 又, which is, they both mean again, but the difference is that 在 is like again in the present or the future, and 又 is again in the past, so things like that. 在 and 这, which are present tense indicators, 还 and 也, which both can mean also or still. Well, 还 will mean still, and they can mean also as well. 还有 and then let's see, 令 and 在, 同 and 一样, 记住 and 记得, 每天 and 天天, 一点 and 一下, 一会儿, yang and xiang. So she's basically pointing out these are similar types of words. Sometimes they have different contexts. In some of these cases, they're definitely used in different contexts. Some of these cases, they are just pure synonyms. Some of these cases, there's slight differences. So she's sort of saying, okay, I want to understand these things. She says, I know you say not to worry too much about rules and that you pick up nuances while reading, etc., but it's frustrating if I always get the same card wrong just because I pick the synonym. So here's what I would suggest with this. I thought about this because there are definitely, I'm sure that we could do a slightly better job of making it clearer when one character is another character, but here's how you can do it yourself by adding something to the notes field in the Anki card. So especially vocab cards. But if you want to add something, consider something like this. Okay, you have 可是 and 但是. Well, consider a sound mnemonic, right? So 可是 and 但是 are very similar. The differences between them are minimal in terms of their actual usage. But 但是 has the word 但 in it, which is kind of like a name of a guy named Dan. So maybe you know somebody in your life named Dan. And so you could imagine that Dan being like, well, I was thinking this, but then this. And then you could kind of have that idea of that Dan that you know being involved in the flashcard in some way, so you can make a distinction between 但是 and 可是. And to be honest, if you have a flashcard and you guess that it's 可是, but it's really 但是, you can just say that you got it right because they're both the same in that particular case. For other ones here, figuring out, like, for example, 在 and 有. Yeah, you can learn the rule, but you can also just see a bunch of sentences that have 在 and 有 in it, and you will pick up on it after a while. Because something that's important to remember is the first several months, if not whole first year of learning Mandarin, it depends on how fast you're moving. And since you're taking it relatively slow, it's probably the full first year. You're not really going to start utilizing the language yet. You're building up your passive vocabulary, so it's okay to let something go for a little bit. Like, it's a natural instinct that we have to want to get to the bottom of the thing that we're learning in its totality, but it's okay to just get a piece of it and then keep moving on and get other pieces, and then you've built up your puzzle in such a way that the next time that you add a piece, it suddenly reveals a lot more than you would think it would, because you've been building up all these other pieces around. And sure, they might not be fully formed, but that's okay. It's not a big problem that they're not fully formed. Let's continue here. There are also some sentence cards where I think more than one character could fit, but the result is different meanings. Now, she immediately brings up the one that I think is also, it's a little bit confusing, and it's probably something we should improve, which is the difference between 来 and 去, because they just mean come and go. So it's actually kind of frustrating to make a flashcard with these particular direction-based verbs, because it's just a flashcard. You're not in space, so you can see what's happening, because everything with a direction-based verb is based on who's speaking and what direction things are coming from. So, like, if I'm speaking and something is coming towards me, then I'll say, come here. Or if I'm saying there's something over there, I'll say go there. But it's all based on the speaker's perspective. So, yeah, that does make for difficult flashcards. I will say this, though. When it's not direction-based, it's usually not a problem. Now, there are times when you can have synonyms where something else could totally fit, in which case you want to add something to the flashcard, which sounds like you've already done. So you said, for example, 来 and 去, come and go. I've resorted to putting in brackets, not 去, sure. Or you could say, you could put in brackets, speaker is here, or speaker is there. That way you can kind of naturally go, okay, well, if the speaker is there, I need to go there, not come. If the speaker's here, I need to come here, right? So that kind of is another way you could imagine it. Now let's take a look at some of these other ones here. In a recent call with Luke, he suggested adding pictures, but it's still unclear to me with characters like 来 and 去. Well, here's an example with 去. You could have a green light, because we know green light means go. And so it's like that kind of thing could happen. There's other pictures you could imagine that would be directly related. So you might say 来 and 去, they don't seem like there's pictures you can make, but remember, you have a few different options. You have sound mnemonics that you can use. So I remember there was if I see 来, and again, everything's going to be individual to the person, but there was a Chinese restaurant that I remember as a kid, so well before I was even considering moving to China, called Lai Lai Garden. And it just happens to be that's what it was called. And so I can remember that place pretty well. And so maybe I can associate that picture of that place. I could just go online and look up Lai Lai Garden, and there would come up a picture, and I could put that in my flashcard. So that would be one example. And 去, go, green means go. A traffic light, you could get that going. So try to expand what it is that you consider are possible connections to the word itself. And it doesn't only have to be, it could be a sound mnemonic related to the Chinese. It could be a sound mnemonic related to the English definition. It could be an association like green means go, so put on a traffic light. It could be, another association of somebody's name. Somebody is, their last name was Cummings, and so you relate them to come, right? That's fine too. So there's all sorts of possibilities there. So just, my general suggestion would be, when you're looking for a picture, try to expand what the possible connections could be. Okay, so let's continue. Sometimes I copy and paste the sentence into Google Translate to test my own idea of which other characters could fit. Maybe this is a bad habit. I know Google Translate isn't reliable. I wouldn't dare say it's a bad habit, but I would say that it's not exactly that particular way of going about it is not going to work a lot of times. Google Translate gets Chinese wrong a lot. So, I wouldn't say, well, here's what I would say though. I think that in general reading this, and I know this is hard to do, but like in general, if you can back off a little bit and go, okay, if I don't totally get how this sentence works, I probably will in the future, because this phenomenon has happened to me so many times, especially when you get into reading longer form texts. When you are able to go from one page to the next and read a full page of Chinese, you're going to run into stuff you don't understand. But then what happens is that you run into the same phenomenon again on the next page or a few pages later. And what that means is that if you had stopped to look up what the thing meant and go, how exactly does this work? Let me look it up and figure it out. If you had stopped to do that, all that time that you were spending looking up the sentence and the grammar rule was not time spent continuing to read. And if you had just continued to read, then you would have run into the same phenomenon again with different context around it. And then your brain will naturally go, okay, there was the first time I saw it, and these are the sentences and context that was around it. And here's the second time I saw it with another set of context around it. And your brain is amazing at pattern recognizing and figuring things out that way. Oh, it must mean this. And so by continuing to read and like letting go of the fact that you didn't know and not minding that you didn't know, you ended up reading more content. And so you got an extra page of input. And then you ended up learning the original problem anyway. So which was the better route to go? Well, it was definitely the route of not stopping and looking something up. And trust me, I get that it's hard to do that. You want to know. We're naturally curious. We're naturally like, why is it this way and why is it not that way? And I totally get it. But what I'm saying is that after all these years of, spending time in that exact situation where you're like, well, wait a second. Why is it like this here and why is it like that there? Especially with synonyms, it's like, oh, why is it here? Why here is it ku, sure, but here it's dan, sure. It's a natural inclination to want to do that. But here's an answer you can have to yourself. Well, you can just say, well, maybe I'll find out if I keep reading, and really it's I will find out if I keep reading, because you will. It's inevitable. Maybe not today, but you will. So it's always kind of just like keep going, because remember, when you stop to look stuff up, you're not continuing. Okay, so next, Abigail says, I can identify with the issue of Anki reviews taking up the bulk of my hour's study time each day, meaning I'm not learning anything new and feeling discouraged at not progressing. Typically, I have 100 reviews per day, and by the time I've done my reviews, checked the difference between two similar characters and words, gone back into a lesson to check something, my hour is up, frowny face. Or sometimes I can squeeze one or two new characters in, plus their accompanying props and words. Question. When you have a long dialogue... Okay, well, hold on. This question is unrelated to what she just said, so let me just finish. Let me respond to that bit. So, if Anki is taking up your whole hour of the day, you have to add less new content to it per day. So it is true that Anki can end up taking up a fair bit of time, but if you add fewer new cards to it, then it will start taking up less time. So suppose today all you did was focus on Anki. Well, that means you didn't add any new content to it, which means that tomorrow there will be a few less cards to review because you didn't add anything new. So by not adding anything new, you're not getting the... usually when you learn a new card, it comes up again the next day. So if you learn new cards, then your next day's reviews will be a bit higher than if you didn't learn new cards. So what you need to do is maybe for a few days, don't add anything new and just do Anki for that hour. And what will happen is Anki will stop taking a full hour. And then you add when you start adding new cards again, you add as many as you can so that it doesn't put Anki over 45 minutes. So you have 15 minutes to learn. And by adding those new cards and, doing the 45 minutes and then learning for the new 15 minutes, that will get into a cycle where it works. And you have to find the right balance. And so generally, if that's just the general rule, you have to add fewer new cards per day if your Anki is taking up your entire study time. It should take up 50% to 75% of your study time is how Anki is. Okay, so continuing. Question: when you have a long dialogue on a sentence card, should you read the whole thing out loud each time? This can take a while, especially if there are lots of top-down words. Right, so I would say that you should mix it up. So reading out loud is good for your pronunciation, and it's good for sort of hearing how a native speaker speaks on because we have got the audio in the flashcard, how they speak on a longer form. Because you hear a native speaker speak a character or speak a word, it's a little bit different than how it might sound in the context and the flow of a sentence. And so there's that. But you also want to practice reading fast, right? So that's a part of learning Chinese. So if you want to read quickly, then what you do is you read through the whole thing. And I would do this on the front of the card so the audio is not distracting you. You read the front of the card and you guess the missing character, or usually you get it right. And then you just try to read it as quickly as you can silently, because that's a skill you want to have. You want to have the skill of reading silently, of course. So that being the case, if you mix it up between practicing reading silently and practicing speaking out loud, then you'll find the right mix for how much time you have. So you're on a really busy day, okay, practice reading silently and you'll get faster at reading, which, by the way, is good practice for the HSK tests, because you have to read quickly on the HSK tests. So you're going to need to do that, so you might as well practice that as well. It's not like one or the other is better, because obviously if you read at the speed of the audio, then your reading will never get faster than the audio. But reading can be faster than audio, of course, as we all know. So there's nothing wrong with reading silently and going through that way. She said, I liked this comment. This is the comment that was on the original article she shared. Hopefully it will motivate me to get through my flashcards faster rather than seeing them as the bulk of my study each day. She says, the comment says, but I never considered that, quote-unquote, learning Chinese was equal to, quote-unquote, doing flashcards. To me, doing flashcards doesn't count at all. I don't know why that person thinks that, but all right. It's like washing the dishes after cooking. Learning Chinese is something I do by reading books, talking, watching TV every day. Adding flashcards and repeating flashcards with an SRS repetition system is just the best and most efficient way to remember those things that I learned. So she says, this comment suggests another way of using Anki. And so let's go back to the original comment here. I consider doing flashcards to be learning Chinese because you don't learn something fully the first time you see it. So like you can imagine you're going through the Mandarin Blueprint Method and you hit a new lesson. Well, that's the first time that you see something. And it's okay that you don't 100% acquire it the first time you see it, because you've got Anki that will show it to you a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth time over a period of days or weeks. So it's kind of like that is the learning process, because to learn something properly and acquire it properly, you have to see it 10 to 20 times, maybe sometimes even 30 times if it's a little bit harder for you. And so Anki automatically puts it into that system. So this idea of doing flashcards is not learning Chinese, but it's like washing the dishes. I don't know. I mean, I get that it's reviewing something you already initially saw, and you always have to initially see it in the actual course, but that doesn't mean that you're not still learning when you're reviewing it. So I would say that doing the flashcards is still learning Chinese. But I do get the idea that the flashcards eventually should give way to a lot more reading, a lot more watching TV, a lot more, doing things that are in the realm of interacting with the language straight up. But that takes a while to get to, so the flashcards are your best way until you get there. Now, there's another comment where she says, this comment suggests another way of using Anki. What do you think? This person says, for my Chinese studies, I have a few thousand flashcards in another system, but working through them every day feels so dull that I also quit years ago. Now I restarted with Anki, but instead of entering words, I use audio snippets from an online podcast database and complement self-recorded English translation. So while driving my car to work, I can have Anki play my English audio to me, and then I can say the phrase in Chinese. If I want to, I can check the Chinese audio. I can also then replay the Chinese audio listening for the correct tones, or take my time to play around with the words, forming different sentences. I mean, I think that's a really cool idea. It seems a bit labor intensive. You gotta. There's another couple points to this comment. This person says, I found this much more engaging than studying only words, way more efficient in improving my ability to form sentences, and more efficient in actually retaining the vocabulary. So this is an interesting one. It's like pure audio is definitely worth doing, and I like the idea of having the sort of English and Chinese together. It's kind of a sort of Pimsleur Glossika-esque way of doing the spoken side of the language, and I think that that's all fine. I certainly don't have any problem with that idea. It sounds labor intensive to build up, though. So you would have to go through a podcast and find the audio and put it together that way. But if that's the thing you want to do at some point, that's perfectly reasonable. I think that this is obviously something that's somewhat relevant to this person because they're driving to work and they have that time in the car and they don't want to be reading their phone while they're in the car, obviously. So that makes sense. And so I would say that that's an interesting idea, and I would encourage you to try it if you want. I don't think that it's absolutely necessary, and obviously it's not something that is helping you too much with your reading, but when it comes to listening and speaking, I'm sure that could be very helpful. So finally, Abigail finishes by saying, but I'm still loving the course. Thank you so much for all you do. I still squirm with delight each time you address one of my questions in a podcast. Well, that's good. Delight squirming. That's much better than the other, like I'm in an airplane seat for a while and I'm squirming. You want the delight squirming. That's the best kind. So thanks, Abigail. And of course, we're always likewise happy that you send in your comments and we get a chance to discuss these ideas on the podcast because you submit your ideas as well. So thank you very much. So I love that email. It's very interesting stuff. Remember, there are a million different ways that you can iterate on learning Chinese, and the Mandarin Blueprint Method is like it's like a structure and a skeleton that's robust and there's a lot of meat on the skeleton as well. It's like we have a lot of sentences, we have a lot of longer form stories, we have a lot of audio, native audio, and there's a lot of great stuff, but on almost every level, you can iterate out into other ideas as well, whether it be this audio idea that the person submitted, and you can make sure that you add in different pictures or elements from your life. There's so much iteration possible, and you just keep following the structure of the Mandarin Blueprint Method, and sure, you can tangent off into this and that and these other things that work for you personally at any point. But I would still recommend keeping the structure in place, and then you're going to smash it as you go forward. Next, we have a submission from William Edmeades in the Mandarin Blueprint Community Forum, where he says, hey everyone, don't know if this makes any sense, but does anyone else feel that every time you read Chinese sentences, especially Anki reviews, it kind of feels like you're gaining XP, which I assume is a video game reference, and then eventually leveling up your Chinese fluency? I say this because, to me, it feels that way every time a breakthrough moment happens like the ones Luke and Phil keep talking about. Is it just me or does anyone feel the same way? So it's like sort of, he feels these breakthroughs after seeing enough sentences. And I can certainly say from my experience, reading a lot of sentences in Anki and kind of getting that, here's a point, and I understood that sentence, point, another sentence, another point. And I've gained, 500 points today from reading 500 sentences. It really does have that feeling of like, this is healthy. I'm giving my brain what it needs to successfully pattern recognize and successfully build up my understanding of the language. And it's just such a great measurable way to do it when you're doing it in Anki, because you can look at your stats, you can see exactly where it went. And it's quite invigorating to realize, wow, I've done it. I've done this successful thing where I've read the sentence, added the next sentence, and I've just built and done this sort of repetitive, but also, even though it's repetitive in the nature of it, it's like I'm doing all these flashcards. Each sentence is different. Each sentence applies to a different aspect of life and where you might use it. And so it's all just like it's eating your vegetables, but they're tasty. So it's like, it's like eating Chinese vegetables. The Chinese do such a better job with vegetables than we do in the West in terms of preparing them. And so I absolutely feel that way. I don't know if other people are feeling that way, but it's great to see that, William, that you're already feeling that way. sentences are huge, and you need to get as many of them as possible to properly acquire the vocabulary. But as long as you keep going, especially that foundational vocabulary, you're just going to keep solidifying it and keep making it stronger. And so keep it up. Do not stop that situation of just adding more sentences. And speaking of, just today, this morning, I got a message that all of the sentences related to the remaining 10 levels of the expansion that we haven't yet released are now checked. I have to do one final check of them, but that means that very soon, I'd probably say in a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks, because I'm going away. I'm going home for Christmas for a week. But in a few weeks, we're going to have the next 10 levels of the expansion finished up through level 57, and we're going to have loads more sentences for you to build up those XP points. So should be good moving forward. Next, George Warner on the community says, "Hi there. This might be one for Luke and Phil, however you guys might know too. Just wondering if once I've completed the first 300 characters, I'll be ready to take the HSK3 exam. I.e., are the first 300 characters on this course the same as the 300 required for the HSK3 exam? Thanks a lot." So I answered George, but no, they're not. And the reason why is because the HSK is not the best way to learn Chinese. It's not the standard, especially for the early ones. So I was thinking about this earlier. The HSK tests, the Mandarin Blueprint Method is incredible for helping you pass the highest level HSK tests, but it's not so good for helping you pass the HSK 1, 2, and 3 if your goal is to pass them as soon as possible. So if you're like, I'm going to start learning Chinese today, and is my goal to to pass the HSKs 1, 2, or 3 as fast as possible, then the Mandarin Blueprint Method probably wouldn't be the best for that, because the HSKs 1, 2, and 3 have two situations that we don't philosophically agree with. One is that there will be words that are too advanced that are in the HSKs 1, 2, and 3, and then there will be words that should be taught earlier that are in the HSK 4, 5, and 6. And so we base that on our lexicon of billions of characters that we analyzed, and the words in their, which is not just characters, it's also words as well, and their frequency numbers. So there are words that are high frequency but don't show up in the first 3 levels of the HSK, and then there are words that are in the HSK 1 through 3 that are very low frequency. And so it's one of those things where however they came up with their lists for the HSK 1, 2, and 3 must not have been enough based on frequency, at least. You know, it's to some degree based on frequency, because it has to be. But the point being that we don't want to just conform to this one test, which not everybody cares about. Like, some people care about passing the HSK, but many people who are learning Mandarin aren't worried about that. What they want to be able to do with Mandarin is actually be able to read it, actually be able to write it, actually be able to speak it and understand it. So it's like that's not... we care mostly about those people. Now, that said, the reason why we're good for the HSKs 4, 5, and 6 is that eventually, when you learn by actual frequency like you do in the Mandarin Blueprint Method, eventually you catch up to the point where it's like, okay, not only have I learned everything through the HSKs 1 through 3, but because I've been actually learning properly, I already know a bunch of the stuff in the HSK 4, 5, and 6. So you end up in the situation where by the end of the intermediate course, which is the first 1,500 characters, you can for sure pass the HSK 4. I have no doubt in my mind that after you finish the first 57 levels of the Mandarin Blueprint Method, you'll easily be able to pass the HSK 4. And I suspect that you could probably pass the HSK 5 as well. And I would even be more certain of that. So the first thing we're going to do when we go from 1,531 characters, which is our current iteration, all the way to 3,000, the first thing we're going to do is figure out in the HSK 5 what are the words that can be created with the characters you already know, and we'll make an Anki deck that's just designed for that. And so if you have the first 57 levels of the Mandarin Blueprint Method plus those extra characters, I am almost certain you'll be able to pass the HSK 5 as well. And so what that means is that even though you haven't reached that threshold of 3,000 characters yet, you could pass the second highest level test. So, as I say, if you're trying to pass the HSK 1, 2, and 3, then maybe just buy the HSK 1, 2, and 3 practice test books and do it that way. But I would say, ask yourself why you're doing it, because the HSKs 1, 2, and 3 are not going to shine on a resume that much. They're not, I mean, it's just not that impressive because they're the lowest 3 levels. The ones that are going to start to stick out are the HSKs 4, 5, and 6, and really probably just the 5 and 6. I took all 3, 4, 5, and 6. I never took HSKs 1 through 3. I took HSKs 4, 5, and 6 about a year apart from each other. Sorry, I took the HSK 4, 6 months later took the HSK 5, 6 months later took the HSK 6, and passed all of them. And that's where you're going to get people turning their heads and going, oh, wow, you passed the HSK 5, that's good. Or the HSK 6, wow, that's really good. And so I would say the HSKs 1 through 3, if you feel like passing them, I guess you can do it. But I would recommend following the Mandarin Blueprint Method as it is and don't worry too much about the HSK levels until you get to the higher ones, which we'll totally cover. Okay, next we have Daniel Leo Simpson. Hey everyone, I've done about 500 of the 2,000 lessons for the foundation course and want to go back and do the whole thing again just to really reinforce what I've learned and pick up on anything I've missed. Is there a way to reset my progress to 0? It's not a big deal if not, but I thought I'd ask, and thank you, Daniel. So there is a technical way to do this if anybody wants to do this in the future, but it's kind of laborious, which is that you would have to unclick the complete button on every lesson. There's a mark as complete button, and after you click it, then it turns to complete. If you click it again, it goes back to incomplete, and you could do that, but it's not that easy to do, and there isn't one way to do it in one fell swoop. However, I wanted to talk a little bit about beginner's mind, which is essentially what Daniel is talking about here. So he's saying he wants to go back, he wants to check what he's done and if he missed anything. And that attitude is kind of an interesting attitude because, and I like it because it's the idea that, hey, you can always do something better if you do it again, and you can always get better if you go through things more than once. Now, obviously, like, there's a part of me that goes, oh, I wish that he was able to just move on to the next, to just start at character 501 and keep going, and I bet that he'll be able to catch up he'll be able to figure out what he was missing naturally, but I do like the idea of, hey, start again. No problem. Start again. I'll do it better this time. Like this sort of like good attitude of like, oh, something has happened. Like I didn't study for a while and now I'm going to go back. Good. I'll be better this time. And there's sort of that Jocko Willink, no matter what happens, find the good in it type of attitude. And I like that. And so that's my only comment on that, is just to say that I support the beginner's mind idea, always starting again, always starting from the perspective of like, okay, I'll do it again, and maybe you could complain about that, and you could go, oh, I'm going to do this again. But no, Daniel's got the great attitude. He's like, I'll find the stuff I missed. I'll be even better this time, and so I love that. Next, we have a question. I love this question from J.A. on New Vocabulary Unlocked, 关心. I'm curious about any insights you might have on this word. So 关心means to care about something or someone, to care about it in your heart. So like, 我很关心你, just a simple sentence. I very much care about you. 我很关心你. That is a sentence that is grammatically correct, but he's asking about the definition of this word because of the two characters. So he says, the first character, 关, means closed, locked up, shut down. These are the meanings that it has. And my native English-speaking brain wants to associate the exact opposite meaning to 关心. 心 means heart. So he's saying, what do you mean, shut down my heart? How does that mean to care, right? Maybe there's some cultural perspective that makes the connotation clear, or maybe there's an ancient, no longer used meaning for guan in this case. Not vital for continuing the Mandarin Blueprint Method, of course, just a personal fascination with etymology. So here's what's cool about learning the language properly. That is to say, learning it by not focusing on grammar rules, but by focusing on knowing the characters, knowing the words, and getting comprehensible input, is that I know the answer to this question, but not because I've studied any kind of etymology, but because I can think of the character guan and what other words that it's in to get an idea of the sort of loop of meanings that surround the character. So guan can mean closed. Like a store closes at the end of the night, they'll say guanmen, close door. Guanmen, we've closed for the day as a business. And it can literally mean close the door. And So you say, okay, well, that seems like you're closing down something. And if you care about something, are you really closing down your heart? No, you're opening your heart because you care, right? And but here's why it still means care. So another word that guan is in is guanxi. And guanxi means your relationship or your set of relationships. Now, a relationship, and guanxi means closed system. Now, why would closed system mean relationship? Well, if you think about it, you don't tell everybody everything about your life. You don't say, like, you don't walk up to a stranger and say, like, hey, I've been really having a really hard time lately. I've been kind of depressed. And, it would just be way too much information to give somebody who's not a part of the closed system. You're basically saying this is a exclusive club, this system of people who are allowed to have a relationship with me, right? And so that idea of the closed system is actually the relationship. And it's like, okay, you can enter the system, but if you get into the system, you're included in the club. You got included in the exclusive club. So not everybody can get in, otherwise the word loses all its meaning. And similarly, when you guanxin someone, you're saying you're one of the people who gets inside my heart, which isn't open to everyone, right? It's open to the people who I care about. So you get to be in that closed system within my heart, guanxin. And that's just one of the beautiful things about learning another language is that it just naturally causes you to think in a way that is not necessarily on the face of it obvious. Like, you could think of these things in English and surround the concepts of, like, well, what is a relationship really? Well, it's kind of a closed system of people who are allowed to kind of interact with you. And what does it mean to care about somebody? Well, it's that they get to enter your heart, and that's a closed system of who gets to be involved. Like, maybe you open the door to it, but it's like it's not everybody can just be involved. Well, yeah, you can think of that, but does it show it on the face of it like it does in Chinese? That's so glorious about learning this language, is you get to see concepts that you've thought about your entire life. You've thought about them for years and years, but you've never looked at them with this exact same lens or this exact same perspective that is literally right on the face of the characters. And that's what's so beautiful about growing through the language and actually thinking about it based on the way that they present concepts. And that's so cool. It's one of the best things about Mandarin. So I hope that helps, Jay. Next, we have Tyson Hoffman on Pick a Prop for Qi. This is kind of related to this type of question. Phil gives many ideas for gas, but the previous video with Luke had Qi described as air. I know that it can mean both, but it's a bit of a misdirect, right? Well, it's kind of tough to say, right? Because if a character has more than one definition, then, because we say air and gas, and in English we'll make a distinction between those two concepts. But maybe Chinese doesn't make as much of a distinction between those two concepts. Maybe it sort of says, well, like air and gas, they're kind of the same thing, so, we'll just use the same character for both. And so sometimes English is more precise, sometimes Chinese is more precise, and makes more distinctions than English does between different concepts. But it's not like the amount of distinctions you can make about something are universal, and everybody will make the exact same distinctions. It's like you could say that this type of glass is 2 inches thick, so we'll give a name for 2-inch thick glass, and then we'll give another name for 1.99 inch glass, and another name for 1.98 inch glass. Well, we look at that and go, that's too many different words for such a small little distinction. But you can't say that the distinctions aren't real. There is a real distinction between a 1.99 inch thick glass and 2-inch thick glass. There is technically a distinction there. So where different languages draw the distinctions is always going to change. And so that's why I don't think it's a misdirect, because qi means both gas and air in Chinese. So they, instead of making that distinction there, and of course there's qi qi. Qi qi is the word that's a little bit more gas, right? And kong qi is referring to the air, like in the atmosphere. So by adding another character, you can make those distinctions, but the character itself kind of means both. So, that's just something that's worth reckoning there, is that it's not really a misdirect, because where different languages draw distinctions is not universal. And that's another reason why learning another language helps you get better at thinking. Where do you divide the category? Well, by learning another language, you get a whole other set of ideas about where you should do that. And it's not like one is right or the other is wrong, but by having both, you have a better set of tools to think about the world. Abigail on It's a Word for Bei. What does "走" mean in the sentence 那只狗被人偷走了?那只狗被人偷走了. So she's asking what's the purpose of 走 in this sentence. So let's break down the sentence. 那只狗. So that means that dog. So 只 is the measure word for dogs or cats or, 一只手, a hand, a single hand, 一只眼, a single eye. It's one of those measure words for those types of things. So that individual dog, and then we have 被人. So 被 is the passive marker in Chinese. Whenever you see 被, it means like, in this case, was stolen by that guy. So it's like the by in the by that guy, by a person. So 那只狗被人偷走了. So that dog by a person, 偷走了. 偷 means to steal, and then she's asking what's the 走, and then the 了 in the final part of the sentence just means it's happened. It's a completed action, right? Well, the 走 is the resultive complement for the verb 偷. So 偷 is the verb meaning to steal, and the result is 走了. It's gone. It's left. Left is the right way to think of it, because 走 can mean to walk, but it can also mean to leave. So 偷 is the verb with the result of leaving, right? It seems redundant when you think about it in English, because we think steal means it's gone, but in Chinese, if you have this sentence structure that's like, 被 something, like a person, so 被人, if you're going to say 偷 or 砸 or whatever the verb is going to be at that point, you tend to add the result after it. So it was the verb plus the result. So it's possible, well, if you're going to use 被, it's going to be and 偷 together. So by something stolen, there's definitely going to be a result there. It's usually 走, 偷走了. 我的手机被小偷偷走了. So 小偷 means thief. 被小偷偷走了. So it was stolen by the thief, right? Or 被人偷走了 is stolen by the person. So the 走 is just a resultive complement. It's kind of interesting how that works. You'll see the same thing with the 把, the 把字句, which is using the character 把 to move an object in front of the verb. But if you move the object in front of the verb, like 我把杯子. So I took a glass, 我把杯子打碎了. So 碎 means to shatter. So 打 with the result of 碎, which means to shatter. And that's kind of one of those things that the 把字句, which is more like an active thing to do. It's like, I took the glass and I shattered it, and I hit it with the result of shattering. And then 被, which is more like a thing that passively happened, like 被人偷走了. It's not something you did, it's something you're describing that somebody else did, and the point is that the subject of the sentence, the dog, was the victim of it was the passive victim of an event that happened. But either way, though, the verb ends up having a result. I mean, that's kind of an interesting way to look at it. Okay, Abigail, another question. She says, what does 一起来 add to the phrase 今天我们一起来看一下? Can the phrase make sense without it? So let's break down the sentence again. 今天, that's today. 我们, that's a subject, us. So today, us. And then she's saying, why do we even need 一起来? Why can't we just say 今天我们来看一下? Right? Why do we need 一起? And we definitely we'll need the lie, but like, why do we need 一起? Well, the difference is, so if I'm talking to you, and I'm just talking about what me and some other people are doing, I'll say 今天我们来看一下. I'm not saying you and me, but if I'm talking to you and I say 今天我们一起来看一下, I'm including you now. I'm like, together, because that's what 一起 means. It means together. So in the same way that you would say, let's go together in English, that will, it sort of applies here in Chinese. So if you just say, we'll go look today. We'll go look today together. Or we'll go look together today. That is something that you can imagine the slight difference in English. So it's about inclusivity, really, more than anything. Okay, so that concludes the part of the podcast where we talk about the emails and miscellaneous questions that came in for this week. Let's talk about some course updates. So each week there's usually something that's upgraded or changed in the course. I already alluded to the fact that now that all of the sentences from levels 37 to 57 have been checked and gone over and made sure we have the right top-down words, and the sentences are all what are called 顺口, which means like they're not broken sentences, they're good sentences, and they're written by all of our Chinese graduate students that have been helping us out with these. We've checked all of them. So that means we just have to do the process of turning them into Anki cards and adding in the closed deletes and doing recording sessions. And the recording sessions are going to take a while because there's a lot of sentences, but then we'll have our native audio, we'll have our Anki cards, and once we have the Anki cards, that means that we can release the final 10 levels of the expansion. So this is huge news, it's great, and we're really excited about it. And then, as we've talked about before, because of the problem with PC users not being able to read the EPUB files we used for our longer form stories, we've been working on moving them over to Google Sheets. And so how this is going to work in Phase 4 and Phase 5 of the course is that you'll have a new story unlocked, and we will still have the story in the actual Kajabi lesson in case you want to stay in the lesson. But we'll have a link to a shared Google slide, and the Google slide's good because it allows you to make it full screen, get your full attention. It has the top-down words labeled in blue, and it has the audio right on the slide, so you can stop and start the audio right there in that moment. Now, in order for the audio to work on the Google slide, you must be online. So if you're offline, there's a simple thing you can do, which is that in the actual lesson, on the Mandarin Blueprint Method course platform, you can download the audio files. And the only reason that you would need to download the audio files is so that you can listen to them offline at some point. And Google Slides has a feature, if you just hit File while in Google Slides, it says Make Available Offline. Now, unfortunately, Make Available Offline doesn't let the audio work offline, but that's why you can download the audio files from the actual course platform. That said, though, I'd recommend just using it online, and then you can have the audio directly in the slide like that. And so I am, later today, going to continue on finishing those up for Phase 4. In Phase 5, we're moving some of the stories around a little bit, but that's all going well and getting ready to go. We're going to change it so that it's a 90% comprehension level and a 98% comprehension level. And there's another thing that's worth thinking about with the Phases 4, 5, and 6 of the course, which is that the ideal amount of reading, like comprehension when you're reading, is 98%. That's what's called extensive reading. It means that you understand so much of what you're reading that the context covers the other 2%, right? So even though there's 2% of it that you may not comprehend because you haven't learned the words or whatever, the context is usually enough for you to get it. So you want to get to that 98% comprehension level. In Phase 4 of the course, it's almost impossible to reach 98% comprehension and have a story that doesn't sound like a 3-year-old wrote it, because it's kind of, you don't have enough vocabulary quite yet to get to 98%. You can usually get to like 85%, 90%, but the way that we deal with that problem is by making sure that we introduce all of the individual sentences that are in the paragraph that come up in Phase 4 before you get to the paragraph. So for sure, if you get to the paragraph, you've seen all the sentences already. So that's our way of dealing with it in Phase 4. Now in Phase 5, we start to go, okay, we're going to show you 2 versions of this story. We're going to show it to you when you reach 90% comprehension. And again, we're going to introduce all the sentences beforehand, so when you see it, none of it's brand new. And then we're going to show it to you again when you reach 98%. So for example, Cao Tong weighs the elephant is one of the stories we teach, and paragraph 1 unlocks at 90% comprehension after level 34, and then 98% comprehension after level 48. So we'll tell you each time when you reach 90 and 98%. But still, in Phase 5, those stories are going to unlock when you've already seen all the sentences in your Anki cards. Now, Phase 6, when we add in the 100 or so stories that our graduate students have written there, which we're still analyzing and still not in the course yet, but those, we're not going to give you the sentences beforehand, but we're also not going to show them to you until you're already at 98%. And this is very much like real life, because it's not like when you read an article in the New York Times, in the Chinese version of the New York Times, that you're going to have read all the sentences before you reach the article. But when you know enough Chinese, you might know 98% of it, and that's how it works. Like, that's how you want to actually interact with the Chinese. So when we get into Phase 6 of the course and the intermediate course, when you have a new story unlock, it's going to unlock at 98% specifically. And so that's going to be great for you. So it's like a Phase 4, Phase 5, Phase 6. You keep improving to the point where you just see something brand new, but you're seeing it when you have 98% understanding. Next, we're going to get into the movie scene shares that came in this week. And we have another one from Abigail, which is delightful. And this is a really great one because she did a movie scene that actually covers the two main keywords for this character. So the character is chang, which means long. It's an adjective meaning long. But it can also be pronounced zhang. Z-H-A-N-G third tone, or C-H-A-N-G second tone. So C-H-A-N-G second tone is long, and then Z-H-A-N-G, zhang, third tone, means to grow or to mature. And so, like, for example, 长胡子 means to grow out your beard, or 长头发. I can't do that, but it means to grow out your hair. And so the idea here is that she is doing an advanced technique with this one to imagine two things happening in her scene so that she can have both definitions of the character covered. Now, just as a caveat, you usually do not have to do this. And the reason you don't have to do this is because very few characters have two pronunciations and meanings that are so common. You know, to grow and long are both really common usages, but usually if a character has a secondary or tertiary usage, it's not nearly as common as the primary usage, and so you don't need to worry about it when you're still in the early days of your study. But in this case, Abigail's going to use a technique where she brings, so let's think about it logically. If the character chang is second tone, that means it's in the A-N-G set, and the other character, or the other pronunciation, zhang, is still A-N-G. So the one will take place in the kitchen or inside the entrance of your A-N-G set, and the other will take place in the bedroom or living room of your A-N-G set. And so we'll have two different actors, because we'll have the CH actor and the ZH actor, but otherwise we're in the same set, and we have the same props, obviously, because the character is exactly the same. So it's kind of interesting how we're going to go from here. So let's see what happens. She says, I have two parts to my movie scene. The first part is Chang, and the second is for Zhang. Her actors are CH is somebody she knows named Chad, and ZH is Giovanni. Her set is a hair salon. So her hairdresser was called Angela, and that's how she came up with the scene. The hair salon is her set, and the first scene takes place in the reception area. The second scene takes place in the main salon. So this is good. Yeah, I love this. You know, by the way, it's amazing how incredible mnemonic visualization is, because even though I've obviously never seen Abigail's salon, I'm sure that I've never been there, I immediately, without even thinking about it, started imagining this salon that my mom used to take me to when she would get her hair done when I was a kid, and I would wait in the waiting room for her and see her in the main salon. And I just started thinking about that automatically. So isn't that kind of cool how, like, mnemonic visualization, it just happens. It doesn't even take too much effort. Anyway, so let's get into the scene. Chad is very proud of his long hair, so he wants to make sure the hair salon won't make a mess of it. But as he tries to make an appointment in the reception, he sees people ice skating on the ceiling. Nice. That's one of the props. He tries to back out, but they're pulling him back with a hook, like the lonely Gothard scene from The Sound of Music. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Is it goat herd? Yeah, the lonely goat herd scene from The Sound of Music. Luckily, he has a sonic screwdriver and manages to free himself and runs away as fast as he can. Great, so it's got all the three props in it, and the focus is on long hair, which is a great keyword connection. I mean, like, the difference between long and short hair is like such a, especially when a guy has long hair, it's like a feature of the guy that you tend to notice. Chad spots, so let's continue on to the second part of the scene. Chad spots Giovanni in the salon and is amazed at how much his hair has grown. Oh, I love it, because it's like long hair and hair growing. You've got the connection to the two meanings of the character. So Chad spots Giovanni in the salon, is amazed how much his hair has grown, so he decides to trust them and walks back in to make an appointment. So yeah, so this is a great scene. You only need the props for one bit of it because the two rooms are connected. You've got Chad and Giovanni to represent the two different initials that this has, and they're in the different rooms to represent the two different tones that it has. And we're talking about length and growth. So you got the two meanings of it. Excellent. This is fantastic stuff. And so well done, Abigail. And that's going to be a very helpful scene to a lot of people moving forward, I'm sure. Next, we have Derek Huang on Make a Movie for Jan. Had Jackie Chan in the bathroom in my house occupying the washroom, stirring the mouth of the toilet and its contents with a massive magic wand or stick. Right, great. So the character Jan means occupy, and so Jackie Chan, sure, is in the washroom because it's fourth tone. Stirring the mouth of the toilet, right, the mouth of the toilet. So what I would do here, so the massive magic wand and stick is the upper component, and the mouth of the toilet is the lower component, and the toilet is in the bathroom anyway, so the way you make mouth clearer is just make sure that when you're saying the mouth of the toilet, that it's like as if the mouth of the toilet was actually a human mouth of some sort, or the Rolling Stones mouth, or whatever it is, but it's just, instead of looking down into a toilet, it's just a big old open mouth. Gross, I know, but then again, gross is part of what makes a good scene sometimes. Excellent stuff. Jeffrey Herzog on Make a Movie for Tong, so early in the course. This is a great memory I already have that is standing in my godmom's, Rebecca Strong's kitchen, and water is pouring through the wall. So Rebecca Strong, it must be his godmom's name, and Ong is O-N-G in her last name, and is also Tong, so the O-N-G in Tong, so I get that. And kitchen for second tone. I'm trying to find out where it's coming from. In my scene, Jesus Christ, okay, so Christ is the representation of C. Jesus Christ is standing in the kitchen, and water is spraying from the kitchen wall. He puts up an umbrella when all of a sudden another hole opens, and more water comes out, so he opens another umbrella. The whole time, searching for where the water is coming from. Is this a good scene? Yes, that is a very good scene, Jeffrey, and here's why. Because every element is interacting in the scene and has a point. It connects to an actual memory you have. Now, it's possible you would get confused by the water coming in, except that the water, the reason it's there is because of your actual memory. So it's possible in the future you think, is the water a prop? Is the water something to do with the prop? But I don't think so, because one, the idea of where something coming from, that is a definite connection that anybody might have. That when water is suddenly coming into a place it's not supposed to be, the first thing you're going to think is, where is it coming from? So actually the water being in the scene relates to the meaning, and it also relates to an actual memory you have. So fantastic. And the fact that the umbrellas are doing what they're supposed to do, block water, that's what umbrellas do, makes your usage of the props likely to be very memorable. It's always important to remember that with a prop, it's a tool, right? Props are objects, and objects, as far as human beings are concerned, they serve a tool function, otherwise we don't pay attention to them. So like if there's no function to the particular object, your brain naturally kind of filters it out in terms of its memory. But when it comes to if there's actually a tool, we'll remember it quite well. So that's a great scene. Next, we have Kika Bisagno. And Kika left a couple of comments here. Make a movie for Zhen. I just bought my boyfriend, so that's the Ian, a new pruning knife, and now his roommate Robert Downey Jr. wants one too. So we've got Robert Downey Jr. representing the R, and I'm assuming that the boyfriend, which is representative of the EN in Zhen, you're talking about your boyfriend's apartment or house or whatever. And the pruning knife is the left side component. Everyone knows he's not a responsible person, so I begged him never to leave it in the kitchen unattended and asked him to cover the blade with banana peels as an extra safety measure. So the banana peels are, of course, the right side component. Great. I love it. Got both the props in there. We have all the connections that we need. So if you're getting a scene that good this early on in the course, Kika, you're doing well. Another one from Kika on Tong. So this is just like the one from before with Jeffrey's question or submission. So here's Kika on her make a movie, his or her make a movie for Tong. I guess her. Let's see here. I was walking along the clubhouse cafeteria when, all of a sudden, Confucius appeared out of nowhere, riding a wild horse. Love it. What the hell are you doing? You almost ran over me, I screamed. I come from the stables. Somebody spiked my 2 spurs, and now this horse is out of control. Help, he replied. So I guess she chose to do spurs as her representation of the props here, which is fine. And so the coming from the stables isn't necessarily super clear. There's a lot of audio in this scene, so it might not be memorable moving forward, but I like the hilarity of this scene. Like Confucius just riding in out of nowhere, and the idea, of course, that they're on the horse relates to the 2 spurs. So I get that. It's just the concern is that audio being the representation of the meaning is tough. It's tougher to remember that. So I come from the stables. Yes, that's true. That's where you came from, and I get it. But I think that might be a little bit tough to remember in the long run. So if you can find a way to get the representation of from to be a little bit clearer, like, for example, he comes down, and of course the horse is out of control, so maybe he gets kicked off and the horse is still going out of control with the spurs in the background. But then Confucius shows you on a map, like, it's like here, and then here, like a picture of stables, and it's like, I came from here, showing you what I came from that particular spot. That might make it a little bit clearer, because at the moment, the only thing indicating the meaning is an audio thing where he says, I come from the stables. Might not be as memorable in the long run. Okay, so that's our movie scene shares for this week. Next, let's have some props, and then we'll finish up for today. Mackay Alpert on Pick a Prop for Yen. J.D. Salinger, I believe J.D. Salinger wrote Catcher in the Rye. Am I correct? Get that correct? If I'm wrong about that, then a bunch of people are going to be mad. I think it was Catcher in the Rye. So sure, that's an easy enough one because yen is related to words or speech. William Admides on Pick a Prop. This doesn't have a pronunciation on its own, but it kind of means like elastic or stretchy. So his answer here is, or his suggestion is Mr. Fantastic from Fantastic Four or Elastigirl from The Incredibles. Sure, absolutely. They both have that incredible feature of being able to be quite elastic. He also suggests a trampoline could be another option as they also stretch, so totally. On Pick a Prop for Lin, which means forest or woods, Winnie the Pooh, because of 100 Acre Woods, and that's all we're going to say about Winnie the Pooh. William Admides on Pick a Prop for Wei, going with the idea of a teenager, because Wei means not yet, so the specific thing, I like how William's getting so good at this, because it's not just a teenager in general. He goes, I'm picking Ferris Bueller, because Ferris Bueller's Day Off is your classic teenager movie. Love it. So excellent stuff this week. As always, MandarinBlueprint.com to learn more about the Mandarin Blueprint Method and how we learn Chinese faster than any other way on the internet. Also, if you have any questions or want to submit your question for the podcast, you can hit us up at podcast@MandarinBlueprint.com. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.